Thanks very much. Okay, well, for one reason or another, Edmund and I found ourselves living and working in Afghanistan for a number of years. And as you can see from the picture behind me, it's a country full of mountains, rivers, and lakes, and the most extraordinary scenery. And we thought we could have lots of great adventures. But like most desk jobs, we ended up sitting behind our desk rather than getting out into the mountains and exploring.
But that all changed in 2015 when we heard about Chinese plans to build a road through this area, the Wakhan corridor in northeastern Afghanistan. We thought this is our last time to see this wilderness before it's destroyed. So we decided to spend a month hiking up in this remote wilderness. That was until I discovered this.
This is a dramatic reconstruction of an email, if such a thing exists. I was just sitting in the office quite bored, flicking flies at elastic bands, the other way around. And then I got this email from Ed saying, I've just bought one of these, let's get one. And let's raft down the Oxus River. And I thought, well, we've never done any rafting before. No one's done this before as well. How hard can it be?
And this is where we're going. So in this area, there are no roads and there are no decent maps either. So the experienced rafters that we thought it'd be a good idea to look on Google and see whether the river was possible. And from that 2D perspective, it looked really quite easy. So we thought we're off.
And getting to the Wakhan corridor was actually quite straightforward. You fly from Kabul to Dushanbe in Tajikistan. From there, you take a 25-hour dirt road taxi, bribing every policeman you encounter on the way until you get to the border with Afghanistan again in Ishkashim. Jump back into Afghanistan, another 25-hour dirt road jeep till you get to Sarhadi Brogil at the end of the trailhead.
And that's where the adventure really began. So we hired 2 yaks and a guide, and we headed up into the mountains towards the source of the Oxus. And we'd spend the next few weeks above 4,000 meters. And every now and then, on our way up to the source, we'd get this glimpse of the river far below in deep gorges. And that's when small grains of doubt started to trickle in.
And nowhere was that doubt felt more keenly than just shy of the source of the Oxus you can see here, when our yak handler decided inexplicably that he would double the fee for our yaks. And no amount of waggling my finger and remonstrating with him would budge him, and he started sharpening his knife. So we paid up and shut up.
And this is really what a source, or a good source, looks like. It's a series of trickles and streams. So much to our surprise, we didn't start rafting at all. We actually spent 2.5 days walking back down the valley before we could find somewhere to put the rafts in. And then we spent a day and a half scraping along with a lot of eagerness on our bums, trying to get going.
Yeah. And then the river entered a deep, narrow gorge, at which point there were lots and lots of rapids. And here's a picture of Ed heading into one of them. What the picture doesn't capture is Ed's screaming. It's much to my surprise, he made it out of this rapid alive, but it wasn't long after until we both fell in the river.
And that's really when we discovered the second shock of rafting, and that was that glacial meltwater is really cold. So we had prepared with skimpy swimming trunks and rain jackets, and that really wasn't any good. So every 500 meters, we'd have to pull over the rafts if we hadn't capsized and run around in little circles to try and get warm.
But very soon after that, the river opened out again into a lovely, wide valley. And we had about 3 or 4 days of just absolute bliss and tranquility, floating in our own little worlds, daydreaming and what have you. And we pretty much forgot straight away just how difficult the last 2 weeks had been.
So, what did we learn from that trip in Afghanistan? Well, absolutely nothing. This is last summer, and we're trying to convince a Pakistani police officer to give us permission to raft the Hunza River in northern Pakistan. And you can see he's a bit skeptical, and other officials were skeptical as well. It took us 4 days of trying to convince these guys that we were trustworthy, and eventually they relented against their better judgment.
Yeah, and so forward 1 week, and here I am being thrown out of the raft into the water after a day and a half of rafting. And as I got back into my raft, I saw Ed behind me, powering away into the same set of rapids, quite evidently having learnt nothing from last time, and proceeded to fall in himself and lose his own raft.
And that is a sad shot for us. That's the last ever shot you can see of our camera equipment and our sleeping bags. Those 2 rafts disappeared around the bend of the river, and we didn't feel quite so smug as we managed to splutter ourselves ashore and just saw all our equipment disappear around the corner.
So this rather bleak shot is the two of us watching our stuff float away down the river. And you can imagine just how delighted the police were, having spent 4 days convincing them of our expertise, to see 2 rafts floating face down in the river with no sight of those idiotic foreigners in sight. And it felt like a very good time for both of us to ask ourselves why on earth we were doing all of this.
And I think we got quite a good answer to that question a few hours later in a restaurant, looking pretty miserable and dejected. And a young Pakistani guy comes up to us and he says, "Are you the guys who've lost your rafts?" And we said, yes. And he said, "Well, I've got a car and some friends, and I'd be really happy to help you look for your search." Sounds unlikely. But they did join in, and we had 4 days of locals helping us look for our rafts and bags.
And at this point, just shortly after the photograph was taken, having got back in the water, a policeman came running across the riverbank to us, waving his hand, saying, "Stop, stop, stop, 2 foreigners have fallen in and died and been swept away. It's too dangerous to carry on." And he was tremendously surprised to know that A, we were those foreigners, B, we weren't dead, and C, that we were carrying on.
So again, it's that question, why are we doing this? Well, these are the images of Afghanistan and Pakistan we're accustomed to seeing on the news, and rightly so. Arjun is a complete lunatic. If you walk across Afghanistan, you will get kidnapped. But there are parts to these countries, if you know where to go, which are completely safe and wonderful for tourism, and we wanted to expose that to people.
Yeah, and here's me getting fished off the riverbank by the police eventually. And, to say that people are generally kind and lovely, I think, is probably nothing revolutionary. And we've probably all got experiences of having thrown ourselves into the kindness of strangers and into the hands of Providence. But it really isn't until you throw yourself out on a limb or put yourself in a raft that you find anything out about a country.
So this is an email I got from John a few weeks ago, and that's the Tigris River in Iraq that he sent me. And I thought, that looks like fun. What could possibly go wrong? And then I thought, there's two tall, very trustworthy men who've lost a camera and a sleeping bag. And wouldn't some lovely sponsors like to come and give them those equipment for these 2 very competent people? Yeah. So if that's the case, do get in touch. Thank you.